In a small village where superstition runs deeper than roots, two children were born unlike anyone the town had ever seen. Their hair wasn't just hair. It moved, shimmered, and seemed to pulse with an unseen power. Whispers spread. These twins were dangerous, cursed, or blessed. No one could tell which. Shadows lengthened, animals fled, and even the bravest villagers dared not approach. But what happens when the truth behind their power is finally revealed? What secret could a pair of children hold that shakes an entire community to its core? Stay with us. You won't believe what unfolds next. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to uncover every twist. Comment below where you're watching from. Would you dare enter the twins' world? The village of Nyavara had always been a place where whispers carried more weight than the spoken word. Nestled between dense, mist-shrouded forests and jagged cliffs, the settlement was small enough that everyone knew everyone else. Or so they thought. Generations had passed with stories of strange occurrences, shadows moving independently, crops growing in impossible patterns, or children disappearing only to reappear days later, speaking of visions no one else had. But no tale had ever rivaled the one that began the day the twins were born. From the moment of their arrival, they were different. Their mother had carried them full term without complication, yet as soon as they emerged, a hush fell over the midwives. Their hair, thick and long even in infancy, was unlike anything anyone had seen. Each strand seemed to shimmer faintly, as if alive, writhing subtly even when the infant slept. Villagers watching through the windows swore the hair emitted faint whispers, not sounds, exactly, but feelings of unease that crawled up the spine. The twins, a boy and a girl, were named Kairo and Luma. Their first breaths were marked by a sudden gust of wind in the midwife's hut, enough to extinguish the lanterns. Some of the elders, versed in the old ways and long ignored superstitions, whispered that the children were born under a celestial alignment that occurred once every 1,000 years. "Spirits walk among them," muttered an old woman, her eyes clouded with fear and awe. Blessed, or cursed, no one can say. As the twins grew, the village noticed patterns that defied logic. Kairo, even as a toddler, could sense danger before it arrived. A wolf that approached the outskirts of the village would halt and retreat when he pointed a small hand in its direction. Luma had an uncanny ability to calm those around her, yet also, when angered, the animals of the forest would flee as though obeying an unseen command. Their hair grew longer, coiling and twisting in ways that mirrored the flow of rivers or the branches of trees, sometimes changing color subtly depending on their moods. The parents, a humble couple named Adira and Thalon, were torn between awe and fear. They loved their children fiercely, yet a shadow lingered over their household. Villagers would often leave offerings at their door, candles, herbs, charms, unsure whether the children were saviors, witches, or portents of disaster. Markets became quieter when the twins walked by. Even the sun seemed to dim slightly when they played beneath the trees. Visitors who had not been warned reportedly felt sudden unease and hurried away, leaving the family isolated further. Schooling the children proved impossible. Teachers reported the twins could absorb lessons without being present, yet failed to perform simple tasks when forced into normal routines. At night, the parents noticed patterns on the walls of their home, faint luminescent markings tracing themselves in the darkness. Some resembled animals, others abstract shapes, and occasionally the shapes resembled people who had passed long ago. Whether the twins caused this or simply witnessed it remained a question the parents dared not voice aloud. The tension escalated when the village healer, a woman of considerable experience named Sorina, visited the family to examine the twins. She walked in with confidence, expecting a natural explanation. Instead, she felt the hair brushing against her arms as if alive, a subtle pulse running through her very body. Heart racing, she realized that the hair seemed connected to the energy in the room. When Kairo sneezed, the candles flickered violently. When Luma laughed, the plants leaning near the window shivered and stretched as if leaning toward her. Rumors began to spread beyond Nyavara. Travelers reported seeing the children from afar and described a magnetic pull, an aura that was both beautiful and terrifying. Some said the twins could heal with a touch. Others claimed they had caused illness merely by passing nearby. The line between blessing and curse blurred until no one dared to be certain. As the twins entered their 8th year, the village elders convened in secret. They debated what should be done: attempt to banish the children, protect them, or prepare the village for consequences they could not understand. Many feared that if the children's powers were unchecked, the village would face disaster. Others argued that the twins were a sign of hope, an opportunity to restore harmony between humans and the mystical forces of the land. Meanwhile, the twins themselves remained unaware of the fear they inspired. They played among the forest edges, creating shapes in the sand with their hair, mimicking the flow of rivers or tracing the flight of birds. Animals gathered around them, drawn to their energy, while the wind seemed to bend toward their movements. Strange phenomena increased. Lightning struck unusually. Crops thrived unnaturally, and the forest glowed faintly at night, especially near their home. The first true incident occurred during a village festival. The twins, excited by music and dancing, twirled with their dreadlocks swinging like living serpents. As the crowd cheered, a sudden shadow passed over the festival grounds. Fires extinguished, lanterns shook violently. The villagers panicked. Yet when the twins stopped, the chaos ceased. Animals returned, wind calmed, and light pierced the clouds once more. Many fled, claiming the children had summoned spirits. Some bowed in reverence. The twins' powers were becoming undeniable. Parents struggled to discipline them, for punishment seemed to intensify their abilities rather than diminish them. Attempts to braid or cut the dreadlocks were met with resistance. Hair would grow back overnight, thicker and darker, with subtle sparks of energy dancing along the strands. Even village blacksmiths, hardened by years of fire and labor, reported hair brushing against iron would leave it cold, vibrating with energy. Despite the fear, there were moments of profound beauty. The twins could heal small injuries, guide lost animals home, and even help crops flourish. The villagers began to realize that their fear was intertwined with awe. The twins were neither evil nor wholly benevolent. They were forces of nature incarnate, wild and untamed. Adira and Thalen, desperate for guidance, sought help from distant scholars and spiritual leaders. Letters were sent, visitors came, and all returned with the same conclusion. The twins were anomalies of a magnitude unseen in living memory. No one could control them, and no one could predict the outcome of their abilities. The children's fate and the fate of Nyavara seemed intrinsically linked. The tension reached its peak when a traveling merchant warned of another village where similar phenomena had caused destruction. Fires, floods, and mass panic had followed children with unusual hair and strange powers. The villagers' fear escalated. Would Kairo and Luma bring prosperity or catastrophe? Every shadow, every rustle of leaves, every whisper of wind was scrutinized. Yet, amidst growing suspicion, small acts of kindness reminded the villagers that the twins' power was not inherently dangerous. They saved the elderly from falls, predicted storms that would otherwise ruin crops, and occasionally their laughter seemed to bring peace to those who feared them most. The dichotomy was impossible to ignore. The twins were both blessing and curse, beautiful and terrifying, innocent and dangerous. As the sun set over the forest and mountains surrounding Nyavara, the twins' dreadlocks caught the fading light. Shimmering like serpentine rivers of gold and shadow, the village held its collective breath, wondering when, or if, their world would change forever. And in that silence, the first threads of a greater story began to weave themselves. A story of fear, power, revelation, and the impossible bond between Kairo, Luma, and the mystical forces that surrounded them. The weeks following the festival incident left Nyavara in a state of taut anticipation. Every sound, every shadow, every flutter of wind seemed charged with the twins' presence. Villagers avoided walking near the edge of the forest, and merchants who came to sell goods whispered warnings to each other. The children have power. Watch your step. Rumors spread faster than the morning sun. Travelers spoke of strange phenomena along the roads leading to Nyavara. Sudden fogs that could blind, flocks of birds circling erratically, and animals that appeared to communicate in silent urgency. Kairo and Luma, however, continued their play as if oblivious to the fear they inspired. They created intricate patterns in the soil with their fingers and hair, tracing spirals and lines that seemed to vibrate faintly underfoot. The villagers noticed that crops grew along these patterns faster than usual, and small plants would twist toward the twins as if acknowledging some unseen energy. Even the river that ran beside the village appeared to shift subtly, its flow influenced by the twins' presence. The elders decided it was time to intervene. A council of the most respected figures in Nyavara convened in secret, debating what course of action could prevent disaster. Some argued for isolation, build a separate dwelling deep in the forest where the twins could live without endangering anyone. Others pushed for guidance. Perhaps the children could be taught to control their abilities, to understand the forces they carried within them. And yet, a third faction whispered darker possibilities, that the twins were omens of upheaval, born to bring chaos, and perhaps the village would have to act before the power grew uncontrollable. One night, as the moon cast silver beams across the village, an event occurred that escalated the tension to a fever pitch. Kairo and Luma had wandered to the edge of the cliffs overlooking the river valley. The air grew thick with electricity, and the wind whispered in voices almost human. The twins' dreadlocks glowed faintly, twisting and writhing with a rhythm that seemed alive. From the forest below, shadows moved, at first small, then larger, until the trees themselves seemed to bend in response to the children. Villagers watching from afar were paralyzed with fear. When the wind howled and lightning streaked across the sky, some dropped to their knees, certain the end had come. And yet, when the twins returned to the village without incident, the forest settled, the wind calmed, and even the lightning dissipated. No harm had been done, but the villagers' anxiety had doubled. The twins were now not just mysterious, they were unpredictable. Meanwhile, the children themselves began to notice the effects of their power. Kairo could feel the movement of the earth beneath his feet, a subtle vibration that allowed him to anticipate tremors, the approach of animals, or changes in the weather. Luma, on the other hand, could sense emotions. Not thoughts exactly, but waves of intent, fear, anger, sorrow that passed between villagers like currents in a river. The twins were learning to harness these abilities instinctively, guided, not by instruction but by intuition, and in doing so, they became increasingly aware of the isolation that came with power. The first serious confrontation occurred when a band of hunters, skeptical of superstition, attempted to capture a deer near the twins' play area. The animal froze in the presence of Kairo and Luma, eyes wide with terror, before bounding back into the forest. When the hunters tried to retrieve it, the ground beneath them trembled, roots and vines shifting unnaturally. Kairo's gaze, sharp and steady, seemed to command the forest itself. Terrified, the hunters fled, leaving behind their tools and provisions. The village buzzed with speculation. Were the twins protecting the forest, or merely responding instinctively to fear? As the children grew, their presence began to influence the village in subtler ways. The elderly reported relief from ailments in their presence. Crops flourished inexplicably in their paths. And sometimes, when disaster seemed imminent, a sudden storm, a wild animal approaching, or an illness spreading, the twins' dreadlocks pulsed with light, and the crisis would subside. This duality of blessing and danger made the village both reverent and fearful. Some outsiders came to study the phenomenon. Scholars, healers, and wandering mystics arrived, seeking understanding or fame. Some claimed the twins were conduits of a higher power. Others insisted their hair was a biological anomaly tied to the mystical energy of the land. Experiments were attempted, measuring temperature, vibrations, and light emissions from the hair. Yet the twins' abilities seemed resistant to study. Instruments failed, readings fluctuated unpredictably, and the very air around them seemed alive. Tensions escalated further when a traveling preacher arrived, claiming the twins were the spawn of a curse, and that divine judgment would fall upon the village if their powers were left unchecked. Some villagers, swayed by fear, supported him. Others defended the twins, arguing that fear should not dictate action. The preacher performed public demonstrations, attempting to provoke reactions from the twins. Yet every attempt ended in subtle chaos. Lanterns extinguished, small animals fled, and whispers of power circulated among the crowd. While no one was harmed, the preacher's credibility faltered, and the village became a powder keg of fear, superstition, and curiosity. Amid these escalating tensions, the twins themselves began to experience internal conflict. Kairo sometimes felt guilt, sensing the fear in others as though it were his own. Luma struggled with the intensity of emotions she absorbed, overwhelmed by waves of panic, anger, and despair emanating from the villagers. At night, they would huddle together, their dreadlocks entwined, creating intricate patterns that seemed to calm their minds and reconnect them with the forest, animals, and the subtle flow of life around them. One evening, a fire broke out in the northern quarter of the village. Thatched roofs caught quickly, and panic spread. The twins, instinctively responding, moved toward the flames. As they approached, Kairo extended a hand, and the fire slowed unnaturally, bending away from him. Luma's hair swirled in rhythm with the smoke, guiding villagers safely through the chaos. When the fire finally subsided, the damage was minimal, and no lives were lost. For many, the twins' actions were miraculous. For others, terrifying. The realization struck. The children's powers were no longer contained. They could affect the village and the environment at large. As fear and awe continued to intertwine, external forces began to converge on Nyavara. Wealthy collectors, curious scholars, and opportunistic leaders from nearby settlements learned of the twins and their abilities. Letters arrived demanding access, offering payment, or threatening consequences if denied. The village faced pressure to either hide the children or hand them over. Meanwhile, the twins themselves were unaware of the politics swirling beyond their forested playground, responding only to instinct and emotion. A pivotal moment occurred when the twins wandered into the cliffs at sunrise. Their hair, glowing faintly, caught the first light of the day, casting intricate shadows on the rocky walls. Kairo touched a boulder, and it shifted slightly, revealing a hidden crevice filled with crystals. Luma's laughter echoed, and the crystals pulsed in response, reflecting sunlight in patterns that resembled the shape of a river flowing from one horizon to another. Villagers who witnessed this from a distance were awestruck, certain that the twins were tapping into forces beyond human understanding. This event cemented the villagers' mixed feelings: reverence, fear, dependence, and distrust. The twins were no longer children who happened to be different. They were forces of nature, capable of influencing events far beyond what anyone could anticipate. Small conflicts within the village escalated as factions debated how to handle the situation, protect the children, attempt to control them, or flee from the inevitable consequences of harboring such power. Even the twins began to feel the weight of their influence. Nights were restless, filled with dreams of storms, floods, and figures calling for guidance. They experimented, learning to extend the reach of their abilities, controlling wind to scatter leaves, calming animals with gestures, even slowing the flow of the river momentarily. Every action taught them both awe and fear, and they began to understand that the balance between power and responsibility was fragile. The rising tension reached a crescendo when a rival village attempted to intervene, sending emissaries to negotiate the twins' surrender. Armed with weapons, charms, and persuasion, they approached Nyavara, believing they were protecting their own people from a potential disaster. Yet as they neared the boundary of the twins' influence, the earth beneath their feet trembled subtly, vines and roots twisting in defiance. Animals scattered, and the air thickened unnaturally. The emissaries, though not physically harmed, were forced to retreat, shaken to their core. By now, the twins were no longer simply part of the village. They had become its axis. Their actions, conscious or instinctive, dictated the flow of daily life. Crops thrived or failed based on their presence. Minor storms would veer away when they were outside. Animals, even distant ones, reacted to their moods. Nyavara had become a living reflection of the twins' emotional and spiritual state. As the village braced for the unknown, one truth became evident. The twins' destiny was intertwined not only with Nyavara, but with forces far beyond human comprehension. Every choice, every action, every step would carry consequences that the village and the twins themselves could not yet foresee. And in the shadows of forest and cliffs, the first threads of confrontation began to weave, a climax approaching, one that could define the future of both the twins and the village for generations to come. The tension that had been simmering for years erupted on a night when the sky itself seemed to hold its breath. A violent storm descended on Nyavara, lightning tearing the clouds apart and rain lashing the village streets. Winds howled through the trees, carrying whispers that sounded almost like voices, a chorus of fear and anticipation. The twins, Kairo and Luma, stood at the edge of the cliffs overlooking the river valley, their dreadlocks pulsing with an eerie luminescence that cut through the darkness. Villagers gathered in terrified clusters, unsure whether to flee or witness what was about to unfold. Elder Serena, who had once guided them, now leaned on her staff, eyes wide, murmuring that the children had reached the threshold of their power. "Whatever happens tonight," she whispered, "will change everything. For them, and for us." The storm seemed drawn to the twins, and their hair writhed and shimmered as if alive, responding to the rhythm of the thunder. Kairo lifted his hands instinctively, feeling the energy in the air course through him. Luma, sensing the fear radiating from the villagers, focused inward, channeling the emotions into calm, steadying waves. Together they became a conduit, the storm, the earth, the river, and the forest all responding to their presence. From the forest below, shadowy figures began to emerge, outsiders who had heard of the twins' powers and sought to claim or control them. Armed with ropes, charms, and weapons, they advanced, oblivious to the subtle currents of energy bending reality around them. As they stepped closer, the ground trembled, roots twisting like serpents to block their path. Lightning struck near their feet, narrowly missing them, and birds erupted from the trees in panicked flocks. It was as though nature itself had become a guardian of the twins. Panic spread among the intruders, but the twins remained composed. Kairo's eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the storm's light, while Luma's hair floated around her like a halo of dark fire. The villagers, though fearful, watched in awe as the twins' presence stabilized the chaos. A faint hum filled the air, not a sound, but a vibration that resonated through bones and hearts alike. Then came the moment that would define Nyavara's fate. One of the intruders, a bold man with silver charms dangling from his belt, lunged toward Luma. Kairo reacted instantly, extending a hand. The earth beneath the intruder buckled, roots coiling around his legs and lifting him slightly off the ground. He struggled, screaming, but could not free himself. Luma's hair shot out like black tendrils, gently but firmly pushing him back. He fell to the ground, incapacitated but unharmed. The storm's energy seemed to surge at the command of the twins, bending lightning and wind in response to their instinctive will. The villagers realized in that electrifying moment that the twins' powers were no longer small anomalies. They were forces capable of shaping reality itself. Fear and reverence collided in equal measure. Some cried, some knelt, others froze in disbelief. And the twins themselves began to understand the enormity of their abilities. But the climax was not yet complete. Kairo and Luma turned toward each other, instinctively linking hands. Their dreadlocks intertwined and glowed with a radiant intensity that illuminated the cliffs, the river, and the forests below. The storm reacted, wind swirling around them in a vortex of energy, lightning arcing toward the sky like fingers pointing at eternity. Shapes formed in the sky, spirals, rivers, and abstract patterns. The twins' emotions and intentions manifesting physically. The intruders tried to advance again, but the twins' unified power created a barrier invisible to the eye. They could feel the resistance, the pressure of the energy, the subtle commands from the twins' minds. Every movement they made was met with deflection, every spell and charm rendered useless. Kairo and Luma were no longer children to be feared or controlled. They were natural forces of the earth, air and sky, with an instinctive understanding of balance and harmony. Suddenly, the twins' power extended beyond the storm. The river below swelled unnaturally, forming intricate patterns that mirrored the movements of their dreadlocks. Trees bent in synchronized arcs, and animals from the forest emerged in silence, surrounding the twins and creating a living barrier between them and the outsiders. The storm reached its zenith, a crescendo of natural and supernatural energy that left villagers breathless. One intruder, desperate and reckless, shouted a command, swinging a torch toward Luma. The moment the flame neared, Kairo's hand shot out, and the fire was extinguished mid-air. Sparks danced harmlessly around the intruder, leaving him shaken and fearful. The twins had not just defended themselves. They had asserted mastery over forces far beyond ordinary comprehension. The storm began to recede, but the intensity of the moment left a permanent mark on the village. The outsiders fled, overwhelmed by the experience, some muttering that the twins were not to be approached, others swearing to return with more knowledge or power. But Kairo and Luma stood at the edge of the cliff, hands still clasped, hair shimmering in the settling light, understanding for the first time that their abilities were a responsibility, not merely a phenomenon. Amid the chaos, a vision appeared to the twins. Subtle at first, patterns in the storm clouds, reflections in the river, shadows of the cliffs that grew into a clear message. Their destiny was to protect the balance of Nyavara, to mediate between human fear and the mystical forces of the world. They saw glimpses of the future, prosperity if they maintained harmony, devastation if they misused their power. The realization weighed heavily on their young minds but also provided clarity. The villagers, having witnessed the events, were torn between awe and terror. Some approached cautiously, laying offerings at the twins' feet, herbs, water, and simple gifts, gestures of reverence and acknowledgement. Others remained distant, wary of triggering unseen consequences. Even the elders, who had debated the twins' fate for years, now understood that any attempt to control or suppress them would be futile. The children's power was not a tool to wield. It was a force to respect and understand. In the aftermath, Kairo and Luma retreated to the cliffs, watching the river glow under the first rays of dawn. Their hair slowly calmed, the glow fading to a soft shimmer. They had faced the external threat, the intruders, the storm, and the judgment of their village, and emerged not only unscathed, but stronger. The climax of their struggle had proven a pivotal truth. Power, when instinctively guided by intention and harmony, could defend, heal, and protect. Yet the climax carried a subtle, lingering tension. The twins now knew that the outside world would not forget them. Scholars, collectors, and opportunists would continue to seek them, and the balance they had restored was delicate. The story was far from over, but in this decisive moment, Nyavara had seen the full extent of the twins' power, and the children had glimpsed the weight of their destiny. The cliffs became a symbol, a meeting point of human fear and mystical potential. Where the twins' dreadlocks glowed as conduits of energy, insight, and connection, villagers, observing silently, realized the depth of what they had witnessed. The twins were not merely dangerous, they were extraordinary. And extraordinary, as the elders had long warned, is never without consequence. By the time the sun rose fully, the storm had passed, leaving a calm, mist-laden village, transformed forever. The villagers now understood that fear alone could not define the twins, nor could awe alone protect them. Balance, respect, and understanding were required, lessons that would guide the unfolding story toward resolution. The climax of Kairo and Luma's story had arrived, the external threat neutralized, the villagers' perception forever changed, and the twins themselves taking the first conscious step toward mastery of their gifts. In the weeks following the storm, Nyavara slowly began to recover from the chaos that had gripped it.
The villagers, though still wary, carried a new understanding of the twins' role in their lives.
Kairo and Luma had moved beyond mere instinct. Their awareness of the consequences of their actions had deepened. No longer were they passive participants in the village's fate. They had become conscious stewards of its safety, prosperity, and mystical balance. The first and most visible change came to the landscape itself. Where the twins had walked or played, the earth seemed more fertile, and the river, once capricious and wild, flowed steadily and clearly. Crops that had previously struggled thrived, and animals, both domestic and wild, seemed to recognize the twins as guardians. It was not magic in the childish sense, but a natural force amplified and harmonized by their presence. Seeds planted near them sprouted unusually fast, small injuries healed faster, and the forest itself appeared to lean into their energy. Offering shelter and guidance, villagers gradually adjusted to this new reality. Fear, while not entirely gone, was tempered by awe, curiosity, and respect. Children watched the twins from a distance, imitating their movements, while the elderly sought guidance from Kairo and Luma, asking for advice on weather patterns, planting cycles, or even resolving minor disputes. The twins' hair, still alive with subtle luminescence, became a symbol of this balance, a visible reminder that power required responsibility, awareness and harmony with nature, Adira and Thalen. The twins' parents found both relief and a renewed purpose. They had long feared the day when the village might turn against their children, yet now they witnessed a cautious acceptance. They taught Kairo and Luma how to meditate, to focus their energy and channel their abilities consciously. The twins learned that their powers were not meant to dominate but to harmonize. Through practice, they could calm storms, guide animals, and even influence the growth of plants without unintended consequences. The village council, which had once been divided over what to do with the twins, now convened openly with the children present. Meetings became opportunities for collab. Rather than fear-driven debate, suggestions for guiding the village, protecting the environment, and maintaining balance were openly shared, and Kairo and Luma participated intuitively. While their age and youth limited some understanding, their instinctive responses provided solutions no human wisdom alone could offer. Externally, news of the twins' powers began to spread, but not all who heard sought exploitation. Scholars and spiritual leaders arrived, drawn by curiosity rather than greed. They documented patterns, studied behaviors, and respectfully observed the twins' connection with the natural world. Importantly, they did so under the guidance of the village elders, who now served as protectors as well as intermediaries. Any attempt to interfere without consent was met with subtle but undeniable resistance. The twins' powers extended outward enough to defend the village without causing harm to outsiders willing to respect the balance. Kairo and Luma themselves experienced a profound transformation. No longer driven solely by instinct, they began experimenting with their abilities deliberately. Kairo explored environmental harmonization, moving water, controlling wind, and subtly shifting earth to prevent erosion or flooding. Luma developed emotional resonance, calming animals, villagers, and even the twins themselves when fear or anger flared. Their abilities began to complement each other perfectly. Kairo handled the tangible, external manifestations of power, while Luma focused on the subtle, emotional and energetic currents that shaped behavior and perception. A pivotal moment occurred during the planting season. The village had prepared a ceremonial field, and the twins were tasked with guiding the crop's growth. Kairo traced intricate patterns in the soil with his dreadlocks, each strand leaving behind a faint energy imprint that directed water flow and nutrient distribution. Luma walked beside him, her hair brushing over seedlings, calming them, and encouraging resilience. By the end of the season, the fields had produced the largest harvest in memory, a result of instinct, skill, and the twins' careful guidance. Villagers celebrated, not only for the bounty, but for the proof that the twins' powers, once feared, could nurture rather than destroy. However, this harmony was not without subtle challenges. Occasionally, emotions ran high. Anger, jealousy, or fear could ripple through the village, affecting both the twins and the environment. One incident involved a merchant who attempted to cheat in a trade, resulting in a sudden, unnatural downpour localized over the market. No one was harmed, but crops and goods were ruined. Kairo and Luma understood immediately that their abilities responded to imbalance. Through this, they taught the villagers that ethical behavior, respect and cooperation were essential, and that power, even in the hands of children, required accountability and moral integrity. The twins' influence extended beyond Nyavara. Neighboring villages observed from a distance, sometimes sending emissaries to learn from or respect the twins' guidance. While some remained fearful, most gradually understood that Kairo and Luma were not threats but stewards of harmony. Their abilities encouraged collaboration, environmental care, and emotional intelligence. Stories of their deeds spread like ripples across the region. The twins had saved lives, restored crops, and prevented natural disasters, all without a single act of malice. Internally, the twins matured faster than ordinary children. They were aware that their powers could not remain unchecked, and they developed a deep sense of empathy and responsibility. Nights were often spent meditating on the cliffs, their dreadlocks intertwined, observing the moon's reflection on the river and feeling the subtle rhythms of the earth. They began to understand patterns in storms, tides, and even human behavior. This self-awareness allowed them to act with precision rather than reaction, transforming their raw, instinctive abilities into deliberate and purposeful actions. The village elders, once fearful and divided, became mentors and allies. They encouraged the twins' growth while ensuring the balance of daily life was maintained. They provided historical context, shared stories of past anomalies in the region, and guided the twins in understanding the long-term consequences of their actions. The twins learned that their power was part of a continuum, a force that had existed long before them and would endure long after. Respecting history and nature became as essential as controlling energy. A symbolic event marked the ultimate resolution. During a quiet sunrise, Kairo and Luma climbed to the cliff's highest point and extended their hands toward the horizon. Their dreadlocks glowed softly, intertwining in intricate patterns that mirrored the flow of rivers, the curve of hills, and the arcs of the rising sun. The entire village gathered, witnessing the twins' harmonization of natural and mystical forces. The effect was subtle, but undeniable. The air seemed lighter, animals moved in calm synchrony, and a sense of unity settled over the villages. In that moment, fear and awe merged into respect and trust. In the days that followed, the village adopted a new rhythm. Rituals were created not out of superstition, but out of respect. Seasonal planting guided by the twins' abilities, environmental protection overseen intuitively, and moral guidance reinforced through observation of cause and effect. Kairo and Luma were no longer anomalies or threats. They were pillars of the community, guiding Nyavara toward balance, sustainability, and awareness of forces larger than themselves. The long-term impact extended even further. Neighboring regions began consulting the village on ecological strategies, disaster prevention, and conflict resolution. Stories of the twins became legends, but not myths. Each account reinforced ethical responsibility, harmony with nature, and the power of awareness. Outsiders learned that raw power without understanding could be dangerous, but when channeled consciously, it could transform communities, landscapes, and lives. Perhaps the most profound impact was emotional. The villagers learned to live without fear dominating their choices. Suspicion and superstition gave way to observation, empathy, and understanding. They learned that extraordinary forces could exist among them without endangering their lives, as long as respect and mindfulness guided their interactions. Kairo and Luma became living symbols of this principle, power tempered by responsibility, and difference embraced rather than feared. As the twins continued to grow, their mastery over their abilities deepened. They began exploring subtler aspects of their gifts, influencing rainfall patterns to nourish parched lands, encouraging animals to migrate safely, and even using their presence to calm conflicts between villages. Their hair, still radiant with spiritual energy, became a visual metaphor for interconnectedness, strands weaving together like the threads of life, binding the community, nature, and mystical forces in a delicate balance. Years passed, and the village transformed. What had once been a place of fear and superstition became renowned for its harmony, prosperity, and resilience. The twins, now adolescents, had fully embraced their roles, protectors, guides, and living bridges between the human and mystical worlds. The cliffs where the storm had once raged became a sacred place, a reminder of the moment when fear, chaos, and uncertainty had given way to understanding, balance, and empowerment. Finally, the resolution carried a personal impact for Kairo and Luma. They learned that power was not measured in destruction or dominance, but in influence, empathy, and the ability to nurture life. Their dreadlocks, once feared as dangerous manifestations of energy, became a symbol of their identity, spiritual, alive, and harmonized with the forces of the earth. They discovered the profound truth that being different did not make them dangerous. It made them essential. The story of Nyavara, the twins, and their spiritual dreadlocks became more than a tale of fear or superstition. It became a lesson in balance, responsibility, and the extraordinary potential that exists when innate gifts are nurtured with care and respect. Villagers, travelers, scholars, and descendants of future generations would continue to learn from this chapter of history, understanding that true power is not in control but in harmony. And so, as the sun set over the cliffs and the river glimmered in the twilight, Kairo and Luma stood side by side, their dreadlocks catching the fading light, a testament to survival, growth, and the delicate dance between fear and understanding. Nyavara had been forever changed, not by destruction, but by the conscious guidance of the twins, whose spiritual dreadlocks had woven a new legacy into the fabric of the village and the land itself. The resolution was complete, but the story lingered in every corner, in the wind, in the river, in the forest, and in the hearts of those who had witnessed the rise of two extraordinary children who had transformed fear into awe, chaos into harmony, and power into purpose.